Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Podcast powered by First National. I'm Aaron Cameron. With me, of course, Adam Płatek, recording live at the Vancouver Real Estate Forum as part of the speaker video series. I'd like to thank the sponsors of this series, Appraisal Institute of Canada, Revesco Property Trust, and Remax Commercial. Our guest this morning is Katie Maslechko, who is the CEO of the BC Rental Protection Fund. Did I get that right?
You did.
Okay,
that was
great.
spot
Thanks
on.
for coming on, Katie.
Glad to be here.
Before we get into what the heck is the Rental Protection Fund, why don't we just start with how you ended up CEO? How'd you end up where you are today?
Sure. Well, I started off my career here in Vancouver actually working with BD. BD Living, their residential team at the time. But I quickly evolved into quote unquote the special projects team of sorts. So all of our unique partnerships, all of our affordable housing work, our life sciences work with Abcelera, project with Tesla, the MEC store in Olympic Village. So lots of really unique collaborative partnerships with really incredible companies and the stuff that I really love to sink my teeth into. So spent several years there, actually moved to New York to work for a nonprofit developer out there developing charter schools. Returned back to Vancouver and spent several more years at BD before feeling like it was ready for the next thing. And fortunately, as timing would have it, this opportunity had presented itself. And of course, the fund is brand new. We're only about a year old, and so this role, let alone this work, didn't really exist prior to that. And so it was one of those wonderful, moments in time that worked out quite well, and fortunately landed me in this role, and have been hitting the ground ever since. Coming up on a year shortly here.
Well, it's got to be interesting to be at the infancy of it, as opposed to stepping into it. Obviously, it's a great role. But you're not stepping into something that's been around for 40 years. Like, you're really going to get to mold this the way you want.
Well, what is it? Like, let's just start from the very base. I'm sure there are a lot of listeners going, what is the Rental Protection Fund? Is it federal? Is it provincial? Is it municipal? Like, let's just talk about its infancy.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Rental Protection Fund, at its core, we were initiated with a $500 million investment from the province of BC. So they are currently our funder, but we are ourselves an independent, completely arm's length nonprofit that's actually governed by the community housing sector. So my board comprises of BC Nonprofit Housing Association, Jill Atke, who's speaking later today, Tom Armstrong from the Co-op Housing Federation of BC, and Margaret Foe from the Aboriginal Housing Management Association. And so credit to the leadership, both of the three of them, for advocating for this for many, many years, but also the leadership of the province for recognizing that putting this directly in the hands of the community housing sector would get it delivered faster and more efficiently by putting it in the hands of folks who really know what it looks like on the ground and making it happen. So that was kind of our origin story. And then, we sort of were officially funded as of March 31st of last year. I joined about 5 or 6 weeks after that, and then have been both scaling up the team, but also building out our entire application process, review process, our advisory committee, and as of December and January, sort of approving and closing our first few rounds of deals.
So it's called the Rental Protection Fund. Clearly there's a affordability component. Maybe just talk about the guardrails, or I want to call them restrictions, but just the requirements for access to the capital.
Yeah, so we exist really to serve to fill the equity gap for nonprofits acquiring existing rental buildings. So not new construction, but kind of that, prototypical 3-4 story walk up wood frame, maybe in kits or just off the shoulder area, and helping the nonprofits to purchase those buildings. They still obviously have to go and secure their own financing, but then they come to us and seek both a equity contribution in order to purchase the building, but also renewal costs, a renewal grant that will help them do the necessary upgrades to the building, make sure it's extended its useful life, and is that much more sustainable for them to operate.
And then as a requirement, they have to maintain affordability. And what does that look like?
Yeah, so unlike kind of your traditional housing agreement or new development affordable housing project, with the properties they're acquiring, both the tenants and the rents are already in place. So in terms of what they're maintaining over time, outright they are just held to the same requirements and RTA standards as any landlord, although they do have the option to come to us with a more creative vision for how they plan to approach the affordability. So they may say, these 5 units, when they turn over, don't worry when we mark them up a little bit higher, closer to market. It's because we want to be able to bring these ones down below what they're renting at now and cross-subsidize throughout the building. And so they can make proposals like that to us, and we'll then monitor that implementation as turnover occurs.
So it's a very bespoke approach.
It is, yeah, because those pieces, as we all know, anyone who owns and manages an asset, all those pieces are intertwined. The affordability and the kind of revenue stream, the condition and maintenance of the asset, and the tenant turnover that happens throughout. So they come to us with a comprehensive proposal that kind of factors all those 3 things in, and 20-year cash flow to prove out that this will be sustainable and that they're asking for the right size of contribution from us.
So you're participating in the equity side of the capital stack, but you're not taking an ownership piece of the actual asset. It is just a grant to a worthy owner.
Correct.
Yeah.
We view it as, slightly more than a grant because, often the connotation there is that there's no strings attached.
Well, what are the strings then?
And so obviously we want to ensure that there are strings and that we're able to enforce and uphold those obligations and commitments that either we require of them or we've kind of arrived at mutually through what proposal they've brought forward. So it's a secured contribution with agreements on title, but ultimately, we have an immense privilege with how the province set up this fund, in that it can act as equity, and we want it to be able to do so when it comes to how it lands on the balance sheets of these nonprofits, because that has for far too long been the biggest challenge for them. They may operate hundreds of units in dozens of buildings across the province, but they are often so encumbered by housing agreements and other things, operating agreements, that it might as well be a big fat zero on their balance sheet. And so when it comes to their ability to be independent or bigger actors in the supply side of the equation, they're really, kind of handcuffed in that way. And so we recognize that by kind of landing that equity on their balance sheet in a really meaningful way, without them even needing to, potentially displace the tenants or in that building, that will act in their ability to expand their services, provide them leverage that will actually position them to be that much bigger of an actor in the supply side of the equation, which we also need to keep building. I know we're here for preservation, but...
Well, other than being nonprofit, what other qualifications do a applicant need?
Yeah, so they do have to be either a registered nonprofit or an incorporated co-op, or they can be a First Nation as well. And we put them through fairly rigorous pre-qualification process that they have to pass before they're allowed to bring us any properties at all, any acquisitions. And so we're really looking at their financial capacity, their operational capacity, and how likely they are to, carry this forward successfully, including potentially those repair and renewal efforts. And we do that completely independently from the acquisitions because, for one, the two are contextual. Just because you have a long operating history of only operating 60 units instead of 600 doesn't make you less qualified. It just means bring us a 40-unit building, not a 140-unit building, things like that. And
On
so
that topic, do you have exposure limits then? Like, is there, if you're looking at the scope of somebody's project, do you restrict total exposure?
we do,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
We do because it's about setting them up for success ultimately at the end of the day, and we love their ambition, but sometimes, it's they're in this for the long haul, and there's real people in those units, and we have to protect both sides of that equation, and so we certainly do.
Do you think the end tenants know that you're involved and this is part of preserving their rents?
I certainly think they do. They do now, and that is what we're here to do. And it's really exciting too now that we're able to have some of our first announcements happening, because of course me and my team have been working at this for almost a year, and we get to know the buildings quite intimately and the organizations quite intimately, and it is just the most powerful, magical thing to be able to show up there for that announcement and finally meet the tenants who have, their lives are changing as a result of this, and they just have the most powerful, incredible stories, and it just really reminds you why the work is so worthwhile.
Well, do you want to share details on some of the first, ones that got over the goal line? I mean, real estate's a slow process, and probably even more so if you're trailblazing to a certain degree. But yeah, do you want to share some of the recent wins?
For sure, yeah, and actually that sequencing and timing of process was really important, because of course we are trying to sync up our process, and something that's typically delivered not at all at a market pace, into something that, acquisitions has to move at a market pace. Otherwise you kind of lose the interest and attention of the vendors, or you lose good properties. And so that's been really important for us. We've announced several properties so far. You may have seen, we acquired 200, or well, not we, but we helped the Community Land Trust of BC acquire almost 300 co-op units in Coquitlam that we announced earlier this year. Just last Thursday, right before the long weekend, we were out in Langley. New Vista Housing Society acquired almost 200 units, or 150 units from CapREIT. Out there that they'll be operating now going forward, which are just a few of the ones that have come through. But whether we've announced them or not, we've actually already approved funding for about 900 units so far.
What's the total fund?
500 million, right?
500 million.
And so how much of that has been spoken for?
That works out to, in terms of the approved unit, that works out to about a third of the fund.
Okay.
And we're kind of averaging about $160,000, $180,000 a door in terms of the contribution, and that continues to improve. This month we've got some coming through for even half of that, and so all these groups are continuing to get even more creative in terms of the great properties that they're bringing forward, the way that they're negotiating, and how they're working with their lenders and other partners to make the properties come together. So we're really pleased about that, because we have a mandate of securing at least 2,000 units with that $500 million, which would average out to about $250K a door. So as we continue to see that per door average decrease, it directly translates into the number of units we're going to be able to secure.
Well, we should then maybe bridge that to CMHC and working with CMHC, because obviously they've got affordable programs, the MLI Select program, which we've spoken to at length on the podcast, which is a great program. I would imagine to marry with this, because it really does diminish the amount of equity required for your down payment for your acquisitions, which must be comfortable, or must be an attribute for you guys. But there are affordability guardrails on the financing conditions. How have you been able to figure out how those two work together?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the affordability guardrails, it actually has worked out quite well in terms of the fact that the rents in place in these buildings and that kind of meet our criteria tend to also be already quite well suited for the CMHC kind of MLI Select requirements. I think the bigger challenge is that CMHC, or really any program at the federal level, isn't designed for acquisitions. And I think we've certainly seen that in a few different ways. Some of that is you can't deliver quite the same affordability, outcomes. You can have a substantial impact on, sustainability. You can have a substantial impact on the sustainability outcomes, but never the same as new development. I mean, these are 30, 40, 50-year-old buildings, and we can substantially improve them, but we are not here to build them from scratch. So that has been certainly a little bit part of it. And then, of course, just the timing of a typical CMHC process, and lining that up with a reasonably realistic acquisitions timeline. And so we've seen many of our lenders get very creative, thankfully, with their clients, and also several social impact investors really step up and offer some bridge financing solutions and things like that, to ensure that the right properties can get acquired by the right groups, and that as they work their way through the CMHC process, they'll end up in the right place at the end. But it's been tricky. I won't lie.
Well, and let's be a little bit transparent.
Well, lenders don't like new processes.
Well, yeah,
and lawyers don't like new processes.
And so First National's been involved.
Government especially doesn't like new processes.
First National's been involved, and Adam and I personally have been involved in a number of these transactions. So I actually have some intimacy with what's going on.
Well, that was a funny part. The perfect timing. Got the I guess we'll call it the approval email this morning, just hours before the our discussion with Katie. So it was.
Well, do you want to go into your experience with this? Because you've had a pretty wild roller coaster ride on it.
Yeah, for sure. So this was it's a not-for-profit local here in Vancouver. They are acquiring an asset from a for-profit entity, and it had existing debt on it, so we're doing an assumption. I got parachuted into it a little late in the game because one of my colleagues was working on it for quite a while, like many months. And then, I ended up taking it over at some point, and kind of right at critical juncture, I had my learning curve was pretty intense.
It was steep.
Yeah. I went
and I've been involved from the very beginning. So I was watching from behind the scenes as these transactions were kind of making their way towards the critical points, getting documentation from you guys, working with our lawyers, working with CMHC, and trying to figure out how this whole thing fits together kind of behind the scenes. I knew that there's this transaction closing, and we were kind of running against this, running fast towards a brick wall. And then all of a sudden, Adam's like, "Hey guys, I'm now involved. What's going on here?" And we're in the middle of like negotiations of documents. There's like 6 different agreements that have to get opined on between CMHC, you guys, and the lender. And then of course,
so many opinions.
And Adam's like, "So tell me about this rental protection fund."
Yeah. I guess literally, the morning of that, I would have known the rental protection fund is here to preserve rent in existing stock. That was the total sum of my knowledge. And then 3 days later, I had to have been well versed in 17 different documents. And so it's been a bit of a ride. But I think we're there. So that's the kind of good news. And,
very exciting.
Mission accomplished. They're going to have another asset now with rents preserved. So,
and let's talk about CMHC. So, I mean, just to build on Katie's point. So the MLI Select program, which is geared towards social outcomes, right? There's an affordability, environmental, and an accessibility components, and you can collect points. If you want more information, you go and just Google MLI Select. But basically, for new construction, the requirements for maintaining affordability are
30 at a base level, 10% of the units.
10% of the units need to be at or below 30% of the median renter income.
Yeah.
For existing assets, it's 80% of the units need to be at or below
at the top end.
At the top end, right? So they've just made it much more. I don't want to say difficult. It's just has to be much deeper affordability, or much more prevalent affordability in the building for an existing asset to qualify for MLI Select. So that's kind of what Katie's alluding to, is if you're buying an existing asset, you want to qualify for CMHC MLI Select, and you want to get the full benefit of the MLI Select program, and therefore be able to put in only 5 or 10% equity. 80% of the units have to be below the median renter income, 30% of the median renter income for that jurisdiction. When you're buying a building from CapREIT, it's highly unlikely that many of those units are down. I'm sure there are examples and situations where that is true, but it's just not, it doesn't happen very often.
Well,
right?
And that's certainly something that we're very conscious of, kind of in reviewing these, but also in how we fit into or partner with kind of some of the existing programs because ultimately, not unlike kind of the BC Builds program that was also launched earlier this year, we're here to kind of serve a segment of the market and a piece of the housing continuum that has been largely unattended to by other programs. These are the people who make too much money actually to afford to qualify for BC housing buildings or typical units and subsidies there, but they definitely are a long ways away from being able to afford market rent. But we haven't really been providing a solution for them for quite some time, if ever. And similarly with kind of this product type within the market, we're used to only valuing these types of buildings on whether they can go from 3 to 30 stories or not. And so with those other programs, we're very conscious of making sure that we don't let it kind of slide too far in the direction of just being another program within kind of the same affordability segment, and leaving that segment of the population still too largely unattended to.
It's really interesting sitting here now, meeting Katie. We literally met 10 seconds before we hit record, so I'm being introduced to her as the listeners are. I've been involved in this process from the very beginning and watched the whole thing kind of meander through the process and get to the finish line. One of the things that I'm impressed by, now that I'm meeting you and hearing the story and the pragmatism that you guys are taking towards this, I now understand. The MLI Select program is baked. Like the CMHC program is very baked. Like you have to do these things and that's how you qualify, and it's very kind of, it's just a box, and that's designed by CMHC on purpose, and it exists for very good reasons.
For bulk deployment,
yeah, exactly. And so when the RPF came up and we were working with some of our clients, you had very different affordability requirements, and it became apparent somewhere through the process that if you guys could mirror your affordability requirements very similar to the way CMHC is, you're cutting down on restrictions for your clients or however your applicants, because all of a sudden now, like you said, you don't want them to be handcuffed by all these different restrictions and requirements. You're trying to create flexibility and freedom. So if they're going to have to use the CMHC MLI Select program, you may as well mirror those affordability requirements. And we found you guys being very quick to say, okay, that makes sense. Let's just go that route. And I mean, it's very unheard of for federal entities. I know you're not, or for provincial entities or government entities. I know you're not technically a government entity, but you kind of come from that. They're a seedling of government funding, to be very quick and nimble and smart decision making. No offense to some of the other decisions that we've seen in the past, but it just speaks to the willingness and the desire you guys have to really make a difference. I'm very impressed. I don't know how this fits, but as I was kind of going through that, Housing Accelerator Fund kept coming up or kept being referenced. Is that something to do with this, or how does that relate to your role?
It doesn't directly relate to us per se, but certainly I think for any municipality who is either investing their own money and taxpayer dollars or accessing things like the Housing Accelerator Fund, preservation of the existing stock that they have is probably the best thing they can possibly do to make sure that they're maximizing that investment, that they're, not still losing 4, 5, or even 10 units in the process of every one new unit that they're building, or retaining some of the existing housing infrastructure that they've got while they also build new. It's not an either or scenario. It has to be both and. And so I think it is a really meaningful way for them to maximize the impact of the investments they're already making. I suppose perhaps maybe the connotation is that we kind of both have the same initials of Housing Accelerator Fund, and we are incorporated as the Housing Acquisition Fund.
Oh, so maybe that's where I saw. I kept seeing half. Yeah. Like maybe that's just my mistakes. Never mind.
No, it's not at all.
You should have just said, Aaron, that's a dumb question. Next question, please.
Yeah, no, we're identified as half on all of those legal agreements.
See, that's so okay.
I'm glad you got to have that moment on air.
Yeah,
realize,
bad question. They can't all be beauties, right? No.
Let's talk about the power to leverage that money. So you got $500 million to deploy, and I'm just going to throw some numbers. Maybe they're not totally accurate, but let's say you were dollar matching on the equity side. So your 500 million now is amplified to $1 billion because you got another 500 million coming from equity from the actual owners of these properties, and then they put debt on it, say 75% for discussion purposes.
Yeah.
So you can now 4x it. So now your real kind of deployment power is in the range of $4 billion worth of assets. So in terms of the deployment of this capital, you're going to reach some point this 500 million out, but really you've then engaged $4 billion worth of acquisitions. What is the ongoing funding mechanisms? At some point, you're going to tap out. I mean, given you've obviously got a third of your money out the door in the first year, and that involved quite a bit of a learning curve. Once it's a well-oiled machine, I mean, the dollars.
Well, you must
flying,
have people just lined up now.
Yeah. So, how does that grow? How do you keep funding it? Is there any other vision to kind of amplify the effect even more?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen just immense demand, which has been so fantastic. Kind of blew us away even. We launched our applications in kind of late June of last year, and by September we'd started pre-qualifying our first applicants, and had about 50 applications already at that point. And we're now over 100 applications deep, and 2,000 plus units in the pipeline of units that are qualified and ready to go. And you touched on something really important there, which is the reality of what occurs when these transactions happen, particularly when they're acquired from these larger institutional groups in particular, where when we are able to support the acquisition of those properties, we're not only growing the capacity of the community housing sector by the value of that asset, but then we're also allowing that equity held in the property to be freed up and be redeployed into new supply by the former owners, many of which who have pressure to be reinvesting in new development and new supply. So it's really a full circle sort of situation there. In terms of increasing our impact and building longevity, I mean, we plan to be around for a long time to come, and one of those pieces that we're actively building out right now in working towards that is actually an impact pool, where social impact investors, foundations, even people, institutional investors wondering what to do with their ESG dollars, will actually have a vehicle to play a meaningful and direct role in affordable housing through the fund, and where they will become investors and kind of play a mez role on some of these acquisitions, and provide a meaningful return to them, while also reducing, of course, our equity investment, and bringing those private sector dollars into the equation in an even more meaningful way. So we're really excited to almost have that ready to go, but really pleased also that even without having that formally in place yet, we've already had almost 50 million in impact investment dollars already step up to the plate on their own accord on a number of our acquisitions, which has been so wonderful to see happen. And then the other piece that we really hope to see is the federal government also step up in some way, ideally with some low-cost debt or dedicated acquisition program, because of course every basis point leverages that much further, and has a really meaningful impact, particularly in acquisitions like this, and the stability, sustainability of these acquisitions as they occur. The other thing we're really pushing when municipalities reach out to us and wonder what they can do to support nonprofits in their community and encourage investment from the fund in their municipality. They have the tool of property taxes that they can work with. And it can be incremental. It doesn't need to be all or nothing, waive it for 20 years or not at all. Waiving it for 5 or 10 of those years, or 50% instead of 100, has a really meaningful impact, of course, on the cash flow of that building, its borrowing capacity, and its long-term sustainability. So there's all these little incremental pieces that, as they kind of compound on top of one another, translate in a really meaningful way and into scale and longevity.
Well, on the topic of scale, I mean, you're geography bound to the province of BC. Is there a vision, maybe not through your organization, but to have this available in other provinces at a federal level, or do you think other provinces will just copy you one by one, or what? How does that reach the rest of the country?
All of the above. I mean, I am always thrilled when other provinces reach out, and many of them have. Talk with some of them regularly as they kind of work on either evolving something almost like this that they already had in mind or were already delivering, or are building something from scratch. And so really love to see that. And there's several provinces across the country who are already well on their way to implementing a program.
If you drop a teaser,
this.
tell us who we're going to see next. Who's the next one to make the proclamation, or not? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, I mean, even prior to our existence, Nova Scotia had a somewhat similar version of this. Theirs was primarily just debt, access to low-cost debt to incentivize acquisition by nonprofits. But they're really looking to kind of evolve and iterate that program because they realize just how significant the need and the demand is, and that it didn't quite work well enough in today's environment. It was working, well in a different environment, but it's great to see them evolving that. City of Toronto has had a smaller version of this program that they had just actually quadrupled the funding for as part of the 2024 budget. So would also hope that perhaps province of Ontario may join them and scale that up further. But again, this is why we'd love to see this happen at a federal level, see the federal government step up in some way, and it would incentivize certainly many of those who are either already working on this or almost there to really reach for the stars and make it happen, and then everyone comes to the table. And same with the impact investors, that certainty and scale and scope is attractive to them too nationwide. And so we've actually kind of partnered with community housing sector partners across the country to push for this a national housing acquisition fund, and have seen just an incredible breadth of support for that. The folks endorsing what we've kind of been putting forward, which would look a lot like what BC kind of led by example on in implementing the rental protection fund. We've seen many foundations, many institutional investors, several large REITs, and dozens of community housing sector organizations across the country, and many more sign on to that with their support.
I've heard rumors that there is a national protection fund or rental protection fund or acquisition fund coming. And it's election season, so there's all sorts of headline announcements coming. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's one of many related to housing. The other comment I wanted to make has escaped me.
We're going to pause here for a second.
Sorry, guys. What the hell was it? No, it was a good one,
You
too.
said you went to bed early last night.
I know. I'm having a hard time.
The stock we're losing.
Get my brain going. What was it? It was good, too.
Maybe 5-year vision on the, because we are like at the 30.
No, I know. No, it was, anyway, never mind. Okay, let's go back.
When it comes to you.
Fuck, it'll come to me as soon as we hit or stop. That's annoying.
Yeah. I didn't want to say it on air, but maybe something to put in the back of your head is you mentioned being able to scale debt with property tax reductions. CMHC won't recognize property tax deductions in underwriting. So in that avenue,
Yes.
you won't see relief. So when you said that, I was like, ooh. So I didn't want to say it on air, but at least put it in your head now that I'm thinking about it.
I
So
know.
okay. Unless you can get maybe a 40 or 50-year property tax abatement, so it's the entire amortization period of the mortgage, then maybe. But that's a really long time to. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, we're not going to get into the nitty-gritties of lending on. You want to do the 5-year kind of horizon?
Yeah, go ahead. I can't remember.
Okay. All right.
It was a good one, too. Honestly, it was.
You just felt it go.
Oh, yeah.
Just,
No, it just
right through the
disappeared.
fingers.
Fuck.
I hate it when that happens.
This is the first of 4.
I mean, in your defense, it's 9. Well, I guess.
No, it's like
almost
noon.
10 o'clock.
It's noon for me. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. No, this is. I have no excuse. I went to bed early last night too. Maybe that's the problem. I'm overslept.
I didn't. I feel great.
Okay, go. Okay, you go back into it. Sorry, guys.
Okay, we're going to jump back in here. Katie, we're almost out of time. And we usually kind of close out this question with a lot of guests. What's the kind of 5-year vision? But maybe this is even more relevant to you because you're coming off of a 1-year execution. So the 5-year plan could be so different from what you're doing right now in terms of the program. You know, it's a little different than asking some 100-year pension fund what's the 5-year view. It's we want to do exactly the same we're doing right now. Yeah. For you, this I'm expecting maybe a different answer. So yeah, I'd love to hear what the kind of 5-year vision is for this program.
Yeah, I love that question. And one of the fun things about this job, I think, is that it is constantly evolving under our feet. And what we think it looks like or might look like quickly changes, and we adapt, and it's always in ways that are, you know, just increasing its scope and scale and opportunity. So it's never a bad thing, but it certainly keeps us on our toes. I think, you know, first and foremost, one of my big hopes is that when we were established, you know, we had this mandate of secure at least 2,000 units with the $500 million within 3 years. And my hope is that those outcomes kind of come and go in terms of being a milestone. You know, they're far from the be all end all. I hope that we kind of almost breeze right past 2,000 units because we are already setting our sights on 5 or 10,000 units. And at this rate, I mean, we have approved 900 units already in about 6 months. So we're tracking well beyond that 3-year mark. So I think that first and foremost is the goal, and then, you know, hopefully whether it's scaling up to support a federal program or supporting our friends and neighbors in other provinces to scale this up and really have you know, not just the rental protection fund but the acquisitions model, you know, kind of nationwide in terms of what it means to our affordable housing supply, our supply in general, and also the growth of the community housing sector. I mean, we lag way behind our peers in terms of the amount of the housing stock that is owned and operated by the community housing sector here in Canada. And recently, a group called CHRA, who's one of the kind of national community housing organizations, did a really great report with Deloitte that showed a pretty dramatic economic benefit to increasing the segment of housing stock that's owned by the community housing sector. And I can say for sure they are ready and eager and raring to go. So not just here in BC, but across the country, and would love to see us really set our sights on increasing the segment of the community housing sector owned stock.
What's the best way to get a hold of you, Katie? I was thinking, if you're thinking about starting a nonprofit, there's one, or I think really, I mean, Adam and I interview quite a few, you know, major owner operators, public and private, across Canada, many of which have mentioned impact funds and the opportunity and the need and demand for that type of equity. How would they reach out to you if they're interested in getting involved?
Absolutely. So probably the best place to go would be our website, which is rentalprotectionfund.ca. There you can find all of our kind of contact information for me and the team, or reach out kind of on specific inquiries that you may have. We also, for vendors or brokers who have listings they think might be a fit for the fund, in addition to reaching out to us, can actually go onto our website, and we've got an intake form where they can kind of submit some of those properties, and then we actually allow that to be accessed on the back end by our pre-qualified nonprofits. So it's secure. It's not like you submitted and then we're sharing it with everyone who visits our website. Only those groups who have been pre-qualified for the Rental Protection Fund can access those listings as they come online, and we're supporting them with other similar kind of mapping tools to make strategic acquisitions. So if you're a broker or a vendor, that's also a really great way to kind of engage with the fund, and we try and as I say, we can't, set everyone up and do the matchmaking ourselves, but we try and implement tools and processes that allow everyone to show up to speed dating with just enough information about one another to hope that the matches happen along the way. So that's certainly one of those tools.
Thanks very much for coming on, Katie. Really appreciate you taking the time. I'd like to thank First National for powering the podcast, Informa for hosting us here at the Vancouver Real Estate Forum, and of course the sponsors of the Speaker Video Series, the Appraisal Institute of Canada, Revesco Properties Trust, and Remax Commercial. And again, thanks, Katie. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me. This was quite a bit of fun. Great to chat with you guys.